Hello and welcome to episode 232 of the Mark and Me podcast. As always, I'm your host Mark. Now on today's episode, I'm joined by an incredible music journalist. He's also an author and just a man of many talents. I have so much respect for him and I'm thrilled to announce that I'm joined by Ian Winwood. Ian is a music journalist who has worked for incredible publications like The Telegraph, The Guardian, Kerrang, Rolling Stones, NME. He's been all over the world interviewing some of the biggest names in the business, and he's also wrote some of the best books out there. And on today's interview, we're going to focus and talk all about his brand new book, which is called Bodies, Life and Death in Music. If you've ever been in a band, if you've ever been a fan of bands, read this book. It's one of the highest rated on Amazon. It's an absolute incredible purchase. And right now, you should go and buy it. Don't even listen to this episode. Go and buy it, read the book, and then come back and listen. Because honestly, the man is a genius and has lived and breathed everything. And for me, being a podcaster and wanting to get into the world of journalism, he is a huge influence on me. And I'm so glad of how today's interview turns out. And that'll be coming up in just a couple of moments' time. But before we get there, I always like to use the intro to touch base and talk about my last episode. And as it stands, this is my most downloaded episode this year. On episode 231, I was joined by Tim McElrath from the incredible Rise Against. I've had so many friends text me, WhatsApp me, people on Twitter DM me saying that this is their favourite interview. And do you know what? I think it might be mine for the year as well. Tim was unbelievable as a guest. So open, so honest, and just a great guy. I loved every minute of it and really hope that our paths connect in the near future and we can record another episode for you guys at home. But as I said, today's episode is all about Ian Winwood and I can't wait to get to it. So I think we should do that right now. So here's me and Ian talking all things music. Ian, thank you for joining me today on the Mark and Me podcast.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Mark. Hello to all your listeners.
Ian, what I like to do is give a listener who's tuning in for the first time maybe a trip down memory lane with you and tell me about when you were growing up. Tell me kind of those first bands that you went to see or records that you bought that made you love music.
Well, the story of growing up, it's not a tale of two cities, it's a tale of two towns. Because I spent my formative years in Barnsley in the People's Republic of South Yorkshire, which is I guess how I identify. And I spent my teenage years as a result of the divorce of my parents with my mum in Buckingham, obviously in Buckinghamshire, and that didn't really leave that much of a mark on me. Apart from friends that I am still friends with, decades later, and also crucially, it gave me. It was within striking distance of London, and it wasn't easy. It wasn't like being in St Albans or Watford or something like that, or Croydon. But my mum was quite liberal parent, and I was quite a good child, I suppose. So she was willing to drive me to Milton Keynes train station, which is about a 25-minute drive, and I would board a train to London and go and see concerts. The first concert I ever saw was actually with my mum when I was 14, and it was Dire Straits at the Birmingham NEC.
Nice.
And it was me. It was me that was the fan, not my mum. And I remember looking back that the album that they were touring was Brothers in Arms, and I remember being quite disappointed with that album. For anyone that's too young to remember, I mean, it just sold colossal amounts of copies, tens of millions of copies across the world. But I liked the two albums that preceded it, which were called Love Over Gold and Making Movies. I didn't imagine I'd be talking about Dire Straits, but
That's what I love. We just let it go and let it flow.
Well, yeah, and I'm hoping to make the point. And these albums, I always think that making movies, if Talking Heads had released making movies, the world would have lost. The critical community would have lost its mind over it. It's a really cool kind of arty record, particularly the first side. And Love Over Gold, which only has 5 songs on it, on a full length LP, one of which is about 15 minutes long. And I liked those. And I didn't really like the more economical blockbusting Brothers in Arms. So I think when I look back, I guess I was always kind of perhaps a slightly strange child, and I don't think it's a massive surprise that I became a music journalist. I sort of had a very close relationship to music. I'm trying to describe this, Stuart, without saying clearly I was blessed with superior ears to my peers. But I certainly identified with kind of, I guess, more, not necessarily the most obvious kinds of music. But anyway, and I continued to go to shows with my mum. Me and my mum went to see Queen at Wembley Stadium, but I'd strike out on my own as well. And sometimes I'd go with friends, but if I couldn't get friends to go with me, I'd happily schlep to London, on a Thursday night or a Sunday night to see bands that I didn't really like or didn't really know much about, simply to go to a concert, pretty rubbish metal bands that would play the Hammersmith Odeon, and it was, as it then was. And they weren't popular enough to play the Hammersmith Odeon. You'd get there, and only for anyone who hasn't been there, it's essentially a large cinema. And in fact, it used to be a cinema. It's now the Hammersmith Apollo, and it holds, a few thousand people. And you've got an enormous balcony and an enormous stalls area. And they'd only fill the stalls; the entire balcony would be empty. And I'd go there, and I remember being there at one show. I think it was. In fact, I know it was Halloween and Overkill, neither of which I really greatly liked. Thinking, why am I here? What am I doing here? I don't care about either of these bands. So it was a question of getting to London and feeling like I was part of something, I suppose. But yeah, I wasted a lot of time and money.
But you said this is at the age of 14, and correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it at the age of 14 you were already starting to do writing and even get some work with Kerrang?
No, that's wrong. That's wrong. It took me years to get onto Kerrang.
Okay.
What had happened, Stu? When I say wasting money, I was.
Are you calling me Stu?
Stu? Why did I call you Stu?
I'm not sure. My podcast could be called Stuart and Me if you want me to change it, but.
I know I'm calling you Stu because I had an email from a guy called Stu just before I came on. Is it any?
I can edit it. It's fine.
If Mark doesn't edit that out, it's a senior moment. Mark, I'm sorry for that. Yeah, I was literally at 10:59, Mark. I was answering an email from a guy named Stu, and I got confused. So I beg. I'm really.
You're confused again as well because you're saying 10:59 and it's only 10:16 right now.
9:59.
You're losing the plot.
So yeah. So when I said, Mark, that I was wasting money, I was at least in part wasting my own money because I had two jobs, and actually sometimes pre-dawn, depending on the season. After school, I would clean a shop 5 days a week after school, and the shop was W.H. Smith. And in the morning, sometimes before light, if it was winter, I'd get up at 5 o'clock, and it was my job to organize the paper rounds, 14 or 16 paper rounds for the boys and girls who would deliver all around Buckingham. It was my job to make sure that their rounds were sorted out, that they came in to deliver those rounds, organize cover for anyone that couldn't make it in. And then I'd have an hour or so just to make sure there were any problems, at which point the manager of the shop would arrive to get the shop ready to open. I would help him up with all the bundles of magazines that had come in. All the magazines that had come in, I'd already opened them up. So two things happened because of that job. It taught me very quickly. It taught me media literacy because I was able to have a look at all of the newspapers, which in an age that was driven solely by television news and newspapers, if you only took one paper, then that was your viewpoint of the world. We're all aware now of different points of view. I'm not sure that was the case then. So that was very important. And I'm from a mining family, and this was the last days of the miners' strike and beyond. So I knew that what the Daily Mail, for example, was saying about the strike, as it's known in my hometown, was different from my experiences of going up to Barnsley, where the miners' strike started, and just seeing what was kind of happening, on the ground, speaking to people that my dad knew. My dad still worked in the mining industry, even though he was no longer a miner. He had been a miner. Also, crucially, what happened, I happened upon this music magazine one day called Kerrang, and I found my spiritual home, and which is strange because the bands that were being written about in the more established music papers, such as The Enemy and Sounds, were perhaps more to my taste. Kerrang was covering pretty rubbish, almost exclusively rubbish bands at that time. But there was something about the tone and the energy and the irreverence and sort of the underdog status of the magazine that I really, really viscerally identified with. And before I was able to lose interest in this, kind of conveyor belt of rubbish that it was writing about, the music, loud music, got better. And I think that it's important for anyone listening to this who thinks of Kerrang as a metal mag. Of course, it does cover those bands, but Kerrang, the name Kerrang, is what we call an onomatopoeia. It sounds like the word. The word sounds like the thing that it describes. So slush, I always think of as a good onomatopoeia. And Kerrang is the sound of a guitar struck with force. So, when the Beastie Boys happened, they'd cover the Beastie Boys, and they started covering punk rock, and they started covering the kind of metal that I did like, which was, Metallica and that kind of school of groups. So very quickly, it bent to my tastes, unwittingly bent to my taste. But what happened was, when I was 14, and you make the decision that you're invited to have a think about what it is you would like to do with the rest of your life. My mum said to me, well, what have you thought about what you might like to do, for a job when you leave school? And I said, yeah, I'd like to write for Kerrang. I didn't even say I wanted to be a music journalist. I'm not sure I was aware of that term. I said, yeah, I'd like to write for Kerrang. And she said to me, well, somebody does those jobs. I don't see why it shouldn't be you. And so obviously that was either fantastic parenting or deeply irresponsible parenting. But it took me, if I was 14 at the time, it took me a further 15 years to land on planet Kerrang.
Yeah.
But that was always my destination, Mark.
The thing I like about your writing is how honest you are. If you review bands, you don't do the kind of PR job. You're actually just saying your account of what you heard and what you think of the bands. When I read some reviews, you can tell they're very biased because they're either friends with the band or the publication wants them to have a glowing review. But you don't seem to care. You kind of listen to an album and write as if you're a fan listening to this album, and if it's not good, you'll justify why you said it isn't good.
I remember, well, thank you. I remember, I mentioned this in my book. I had a look at a piece that I wrote from the very, very early days of my quote unquote career. And I interviewed Lane Staley, who was the singer in a band called Alice in Chains, who at the time, this is 1993, and at the time, they were double platinum in the United States. Bands don't go double platinum anymore. That's 2 million sales and above. and they were sort of a Brixton Academy band in the UK. In fact, I'd seen them at the Brixton Academy, and I interviewed them at the Royal Garden Hotel in Kensington, which is a posh, nice hotel overlooking Kensington Gardens. And on the ride up in the elevator, so I would be 22, and in the ride up on on the ride up in the elevator, the band's PR made it heavily suggested it to me that it would be better if I didn't ask them about drugs.
Right.
Now, you could say that this is none of my business, but the album that they were promoting and touring is almost, it's just an album called Dirt. It's
an incredible album.
But it's almost exclusively about the appeal of and the dangers of drug use.
Yeah.
And it's worth mentioning for anyone that doesn't know that Lane Staley, that lifestyle killed Lane Staley and ruined his life pretty much from the moment that I had spoken to him. Things certainly did not get any better for him. And I remember riding up in that elevator thinking, no, I'm going to ignore that advice. I don't think that it was a strong suggestion.
Yeah.
And I remember, so I reread this piece for the book, and I was, I suppose, quite clear in what I thought music journalism should be. I'm not sure I was quite as, my instincts were good, I think. I'm sounding very serious now and perhaps a bit pompous. But since you asked, I think the job, if the job means anything at all, it is to make the distance between what I say in private and what I am able to write in for a readership as slim as is humanly possible.
Yeah.
I remember because it's, and I never wanted to be friends with the bands. I still don't. I do have some exceptions, but I'm not. I don't want to be. I'm not. I'm rock and roll adjacent. I don't work in the music industry. The music industry has never paid me, so why should I do its work for them? The readers pay me because they're the ones, especially then when the only way you could hear an album, for example, was to buy it. And like you said, Mark, as a reader of Kerrang as a teenager, I could tell who was lying to me. And I even knew the reasons why, because they wanted to be identified with a particular movement, or they had their bands that they had access to and they considered themselves. But that was just never for me. I remember, just to wrap this question up, and it still goes on. I remember being at a listening party. The pandemic was swirling into town, but everybody, it was strange to think back, because everybody was almost carried on until normal, until the week before it was obvious that something terrible was happening, and indeed was going to happen to an even greater degree. But in February 2020, I went to listen to a Biffy, what was then the new Biffy Clyro album, A Celebration of Endings, at Warner Brothers. I think that's one of the great British albums of the past 50 years, for what that's worth. But we were talking about, me and an editor, and me and two editors were talking about the new Green Day, the then forthcoming Green Day album, Father of All Motherfuckers. Even the title annoys me. And I love Green Day, but the album's a dog. It's just dreadful.
Yeah.
And we were all talking about how horrible the album was. Yet when the publication came out that was edited by the one editor that I was talking to, it was the other editor. It wasn't a magazine that reviewed albums, but the editor, who was the editor of the magazine that reviewed albums, saying how dreadful it was, saying how everyone at that magazine thought it was dreadful. The review came out and it was 4 out of 5. and that's just unacceptable. It's
Yeah.
unacceptable, and it's certainly unacceptable to me. So thank you. I'll take that as a compliment, Mark. I am indeed a pompous pain in the arse about that kind of thing.
I liked your comment then about Biffy Clyro as well. For me, I've listened to them genuinely since Black and Sky, and I think Simon Neil is the best songwriter we have in this country. I think the lyrics he writes, the music he writes, the time signatures, the music he does with the two brothers, Ben and James,
Yeah.
I truly believe they're the best live band on the planet right now.
Right. Yeah, I certainly think they're the best. I think they're the best band in Britain. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
Unbelievable band. And what
Mm-hmm.
I think it must be interesting is you put yourself out there. So when you're writing these reviews or your books and everything, everyone automatically then gets to know you, but you don't know them. So when you're so honest and so open, what's it like then when you meet certain individuals or bands that you have written about? Is it awkward? Do you have situations where you're like, oh, fucking hell, like I wasn't that kind about you, and now I'm in a situation where I've got to kind of try and be nice?
I have lost, Mark, a little bit of the bloodlust that I used to have.
Yeah.
I realise now. So in my book Bodies, yeah, if you're writing over the span of the book, you have a lot of time to analyze in a way that you don't in short form writing that arrives at a very short deadline. And I realized that part of my DNA as a writer is that I am always kicking against something. And I am always trying to cause trouble, I guess. And sometimes I think I did it for its own sake. And there are bands, doubtless, that I have spoken unkindly about that didn't perhaps deserve it. Now, that is that's a problem of control rather than instinct. I think my instincts are quite good in that I don't, as I said in the last answer, I don't want to be part of a gang. I don't want to be part of. I mean, I do want to be part of a gang, but I want to be a part of a gang of music journalists.
Yeah.
I don't. Here's a good example. If I go on a tour, and music journalists only ever go on, on tour for 2 or 3 days. It's not like,
Yeah.
It's not like you're following Metallica around America for 2 months. I am the only one there, again, that's not being paid to be there by the tour, that's not earning money from the tour itself. And I'm the only one on the tour who doesn't really have a job apart from to speak to the band, which I could do anyway without being on the tour. And my work happens when I get home, when I write up the story. Have there been any? I'm not sure I'm answering this question very satisfactorily.
No, I'm loving it.
I can't remember coming a cropper with anyone.
No.
To be honest with you, face to face. I remember actually once I saw the Wild Hearts at the Forum up in Kentish Town, which is about a mile from where half a mile maybe from where I'm speaking to you now. And they were so terrible. They were so terrible that I gave them the kind of review that you only use in cases of extreme emergency.
Yeah.
It was contemptuous, I would say, and it was also, I would say, a good piece of writing. And I remember, so this was for Kerrang, and I remember seeing them at the subsequent Kerrang Awards, and thinking, and they're an extremely volatile band. They once smashed up the Kerrang office because of something someone else wrote about them in a news story. So this really could have gone either way. And I actually got thanked for the review because they viewed it as being a sharp reminder of what had gone wrong during that time and certainly that night. So that was a very surprising outcome. But no, but again, it may be, Mark, that because I don't really socialize with bands. I don't really, hang out with them. So
No.
that might be why I'm not in a wheelchair or blind in one eye.
So to keep on in the zone and the kind of where we were,
Yeah.
what I wanted to kind of get an idea of is you've now done almost 30 years of writing and telling your ways of the kind of experiences in the industry. And I suppose, how do you keep on doing this for 3 decades and still feel inspired and have that passion inside you?
That's a good question. I think because that's a really good question. I think, Mark, because I write for different people now.
Yeah.
I still write for Kerrang, and I would hope to continue doing so because I guess it's a big part of my psychological makeup. Um, but there's no doubt about it. Kerrang's not in very good health at the moment. I mean, if
No.
they hear that, they might sack me. But there've been redundancies. It exists for the most part, with the exception of occasional magazines. It exists. It exists as a website, and like the enemy.com, it doesn't have much of a footprint in that regard. So I'm now a broadsheet, a famous broadsheet writer, Mark. I should, when it's audio only, I should make it more obvious that I'm making a joke now. uh, and when I started at Kerrang, which was 2000, I would get away with murder in print. And sometimes, as discussed, I abused that privilege. I don't think I knew I was doing. I didn't do so in bad faith, but looking back, I was perhaps a bit trigger happy. But I have the same amount of freedom at the Telegraph and the Times. And it's strange writing for a right-wing press because I'm not right-wing. And I always add that caveat. But at the same time, I am given an extraordinary amount of freedom to write as ever write in whichever way I please. So that's sort of like a different gig for me. I've never. I noticed at certainly in the 2010s that I was PRs would request that I not interview their bigger bands. This happened with My Chemical Romance. There are some other examples as well that are slipping my mind, and Kerrang would just be okay with that. They'd allow themselves to be pushed around rather than saying, actually, no, that this is not how it works. There's just no way that a broadsheet newspaper would put up with that. What also happens, Mark, is that for the first time in my writing career, I'm no longer just the rock guy. When I was at Kerrang, when Kerrang was, my living wage, I'd do bits and bobs for Enemy, for Q or for Mojo, and I was headhunted by the NME once, and all of those places just viewed me as the rock guy because I'd come from Kerrang. And any music journalist worth their salt will listen to all different kinds of music, for one thing. But at a broadsheet at the broadsheet, that's no longer the case. So I'm sort of able to interview anyone. I mean, they don't say yes to all of my suggestions. I should make that clear. And I've only written a couple of things for the Times. I have a couple of more things to write for them. But certainly for the Telegraph, I've interviewed, James Taylor and Billy Bragg and Paul Heaton and Tal Wilkenfeld, and I'm trying to run the numbers in my head. So that's quite exciting. So being able to say what it is that you'd like to say, and be allowed to do that, and be expected to do that. So that sort of made it more exciting. I think if I was writing only for Kerrang, I'm not sure I would be able to give you a glowing report card. Also, I'm not sure I'm answering this question very well either, Mark. But let's go. Also, I had a book published this year to gallop across, 107 by about 113,000 words. I'm adding an extra chapter to the next edition of the book that I've written. The way that book is written in terms of its technique was a real breakthrough for me as a writer. So so that's a really long and I'm not sure particularly interesting answer, Mark. The short answer is that I love to write. In many ways, I'm never happier than when I'm doing so, especially when I finally hit a groove when I'm doing it. And it sort of feels like I'm divining for water, really, rather than writing, that if you want the truth of it. And that I have a palette now upon which to write that I never had before, because I'm no longer pigeonholed. And I guess I'm just a bit more legitimate, I suppose. Yeah. It feels slightly more legitimate, which is fine. It's okay being, and I still identify with underdogs. I identify with underdog bands. And my part of my identification with Kerrang was that it was an underdog magazine. Even when it was selling 110, 120,000 copies a week, it was still the underdog magazine. And similarly, even though Biffy Clyro headlining the O2 Arena here in London to 20,000 people, they're still an underdog band. You see what I mean? And I very closely identify with that. But, as a man of, I'm in my very early 50s now. You can't be the scrappy underdog forever. So I guess I'm in my Black Album years.
Amazing. And has there been, and this is someone who does interviews myself, but has there been any interviews that you've prepped, you've gone there hoping it would go a certain way, but it's just been an absolute shit show? You've literally met someone and they've just been an arsehole, and it's been hard work and it's made you just not want to do the interview?
Not by the end of the interview, no.
Good work.
I don't think, because my technique, in fact, I put this in an earlier draft of Bodies, but I cut it out because I couldn't make myself sound like anything other than a plonker describing it, because I don't want to be friends with the band.
Yeah.
I don't mind causing a great offense in interviews. Now, I don't go in there doing that. I do like asking difficult questions. I really enjoy that. So say you've got a 30-minute interview slot, which is what I used to get, and I tend now to get an hour on account of being an extraordinarily famous literary sensation.
Exactly.
Yeah. You're aware of the time. So you don't start with the question that might cause your interviewee to go storming out of the room.
Yeah.
But if it needs asking, it needs asking. It's just a question of placement. So you give them 5 minutes to sort of imagine it's like changing the barrel on a pump of beer. You need a couple of pints before you get a pint that you can sell and drink. That's how I think of the first 5 minutes in the 30-minute interview. Doesn't have to be that way. But when I interview someone, and maybe you do this, maybe you're doing this now, although it's slightly different because it's a podcast, but if it's a print interview, I'm listening to what they're saying and I'm thinking in my mind, right, I can use that. I can use that as a quote. Okay, I'm probably not going to use that as a quote, but I can use that as information that I've put in my own words. Or this is rubbish, this is boring. And if it gets to sort of 7 or 8 minutes of rubbish or boring, or indeed them being difficult, more to the point, I just have to make something happen. It's my responsibility to make something happen. And if that involves causing a scene, then so be it, really, to be honest with you. I'll give you an example. On my birthday, 21 and a half years ago, my 30th birthday, I was in Los Angeles to interview Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, who were the kind of group that existed on the borderline between the enemy and Kerrang.
Yeah, and I saw them support Oasis.
Right, we do a lot of that. We used to do a lot of those bands, and that was great. I loved that. And sorry if I've mentioned this. It was in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And we met them at the venue. I think they were supporting a dance band. It might have been Orbital that they were supporting, or Spiritual. Anyway, and they were fine. They were lovely. We were all having a chat. And then we got on the tour bus and the interview started. And I just could not get more than a sentence out of them in response to any question that I asked. It was just performative, kind of like Jesus and the Mary Chain, the Jesus and Mary Chain kind of just absolute disinterest. To such an extent that my photographer friend, who I traveled with a lot at that time, a God Amongst Men by the name of Paul Harris, who features in my book, actually had to leave the bus because he found it so excruciating. And I was just thinking, it's just not acceptable to go back to my editors and say, oh, I didn't really get anything out of them. So I just became ruder and ruder and ruder and ruder and ruder, to the point where they're kind of, because they were performing, you see, they were performing an act, because I'd spoken to them before, and they were reasonable and articulate and talkative people. So it was an act for my tape recorder and to make life difficult for me. And I just thought, no, I'm not having this. And it honestly, Mark, reached a point where I was essentially saying, I don't see why anyone would listen to your music. It's just worthless. This is just, and of course, you know, that it's not worthless, no. and it's certainly not worthless to them. So they sort of then snap out of it, and something happens. That's what. So no, I don't. No, they don't always go in the way that you would like them to, but that's fine as well. All that matters is that you get something that you can put on the page. That's a successful interview, and don't write the headline before you get to the ballpark, if you see what I mean.
Have you got if you kind of look back on your life and you're on This Is Your Life, what would be your favorite kind of achievement of an interview? Is there one that stands above all the others that you're just so proud of?
I mean, there's probably 1,000 interviews, Mark, for me to run through now.
But there must be one that you always, if you were given like a demo tape of your work, what would be on your best of? Or maybe the one you just enjoyed the most.
Well, I remember interviewing the Beastie Boys in New York, and they had been away for about 5 years. And this is a really good example, actually, of that first opening 5 minute rule that I've got. And I just said, "Where have you been? You know, what's been going on?" Just to get it open, get it going. And it's worth mentioning that I just adore the Beastie Boys.
Yeah.
And in a rare example of me actually getting something right, I bought Paul's Boutique, their now greatly revered second album, on the day it came out. And I imagine, Mark, a lot of your listeners are too young to remember this. But at that point, the Beastie Boys were a laughing stock. This is in 1989. They were a laughing stock. And the album really, it was almost like a Vanilla Ice album. That's how people regarded the Beastie Boys, which is remarkable to think back on. And I would say to people, you have to listen to this album. You have to listen to Paul's Boutique. And remember, you had to buy the damn thing to do that back then. And people would just laugh at me. They'd laugh at me. So anyway, going fast forwarding to 2004. And I said, "Oh, where have you been?" And they said, "Oh yeah, we were kidnapped by Sasquatch, by Sasquatch." And Sasquatch is Bigfoot. We call it Bigfoot for anyone that doesn't know that. And I said, "Okay, well that's cool." And they said, "Yeah, we lived in a cave, kidnapped by Sasquatch." And I said, "Oh, and did Sasquatch teach you anything? Did you learn anything from Sasquatch?" And they said, "Yeah, he taught us how to dance." And I said, "Okay, show me." And we were in this small little office in they kind of had like a business, like an operations center. I think it was in Chelsea. It was in Manhattan. And now they didn't all do it, but two of them did it. Mike D and Adam Horowitz, Michael Diamond and Adam Horowitz got up. And if you've seen kind of the Intergalactic video where they're kind of walking with their arms outstretched, but they're also doing beatbox noises with their mouth. So they're and dancing. Now, Adam Yauch didn't do it, but he was in the room and he was clearly enjoying the experience, if memory serves. But I remember, and I was sat down, I remember sitting there and thinking, the Beastie Boys are dancing for me. The Beastie Boys are dancing for me. And they were just, I remember describing them, that they were like a family of meerkats that had been raised on a diet of methamphetamine and Sunny Delight. Because they were pretty much uncontrollable in the interview. And that's fine with me. I can roll with that. And it was an enormous amount of fun, and I was enormously pleased with the feature. So let's pick that one. Sorry, that took me a while to access.
No, it's good, and I wish I'd been there or got to see it on video.
It's not every day that the one of the world's coolest bands dances for you. So let's go for that.
And one of my final questions is, there's going to be a lot of people that listen that maybe go to festivals or are trying online blogging or doing reviews, and I see more and more people getting into it. But what advice do you give to those people? Because it seems now that it's weird if someone doesn't have a podcast. The world is so absolutely crazy on people doing live streaming and Twitch accounts and podcasts. But what advice do you give to people that want to do writing or interviewing and try and stand above the others that are out there?
You mean writing specifically, Mark?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, write.
Yeah.
I would say that it took me. I mean, I behaved very foolishly in the 90s. I behaved very foolishly until quite recently, actually. So I didn't. Excuse me. I didn't perhaps work on my craft and my technique as much as I should. Fortunately, I guess I had a level of natural talent that took me a certain distance. Now, I told you that I was. I don't know why I've made this answer about me all of a sudden. Before we started this interview, I told you that I was up till about 3:30 reviewing a music book for the Times.
Yeah.
And by about sort of 1 o'clock, I had it at the point where it was acceptable. It would have been acceptable and accepted, I think, by my editor at the Times. It might be that when we shut down this, I've got an email from said editor saying that it's completely unacceptable. But I think, but still, I took that extra time to try and search for perfection, really.
Yeah.
So if you are serious about the writing, try and search for perfection. Okay. So I'm speaking to the purists. I'm speaking to people who approached it like I did.
Yeah.
If you are viewing writing as a way to become part of the scene, and then to maybe become a PR, or to have a relationship with someone in a band, or whatever, just to be part of the music industry, I don't really have any advice for you, because that wasn't my motivation. But if you want to write and take it seriously, and read as well, and try and work out what other writers have done, and I don't just mean other music journalists, and steal occasionally if you want to. I've nicked. There's a sentence in my book Bodies, which I just thought that's a really great. It's from Roddy Doyle book, and I just stole it.
Yep.
I mean, it's only like it's what kills me. So it's only a 5-word sentence, but I just nicked it. And then have a think about what it is you want from this. When I started out, it was much more difficult to become a music journalist, because the barriers between the public and the press were codified. If you wrote for a magazine, things had to happen for you to write for a magazine. It's quite easy to become a music journalist of some description now, like you said, with blogs, particularly. But work out what it is you want from it, and if what it is that you want from it is a living, then the only way you're going to get that, I think, is if your writing is clearly better than other people's, because it's just so very, very difficult to earn a living from this now. It was quite easy. When I started at Kerrang, I was very fortunate when I started at Kerrang, Mark, that very quickly they placed me on what we call a retainer, which means that I got paid whether I wrote or not. I got paid a set amount every week. And on the weeks that my writing exceeded the financial amount of this retainer, they would pay me the difference. So, I mean, that kind of thing just doesn't exist.
It's unheard of, isn't it?
Oh, completely unheard of. And that lasted for about 10 years until I wrote my first book. And then I thought it would be the honorable to step away from the retainer. However, there were still writers that were not on retainers. And I would say that there were a good 6 or 7 of them who still were able to earn a living, pretty much from Kerrang, from what Kerrang gave them. And then there were other music journalists, and this is perfectly a perfectly honorable tradition as well, who used it as a kind of part-time job. They had full-time jobs, so they couldn't, go to San Francisco to interview Faith No More, for example.
Yeah.
But they could, go to the Lead Mill in Sheffield, or not even the Lead Mill, because that's a small place. They could go to the Cardiff Arena to review Manic Street Preludes, and do that. And those are perfectly honourable traditions as well. So work out, write. It's all about the writing. If you're like me, I guess that sounds just so self-important, but it's true. And work out what it is that you want from it. But it's tough out there. There's no doubt about it. I don't want to sound discouraging.
No, because it's honest, and that's what we need. People,
Yeah, I don't want to sound discouraging, and I hope that I don't. But speaking realistically, it's really, really tough out there to make a living as a music journalist, unless you're a famous broadsheet literary sensation.
Is there a dream guest that you've always wished that you could have had time with that's still on that list? Like when I started podcasting, I'm 220 episodes in, I made a list of 10 names that would be my dream, and I've done 9 of them. So like for me personally, I'm like, fucking brilliant. Like
who's the last one? Who haven't you got?
Edgar Wright.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
you could get him, could you not?
It's difficult sometimes. People that stand in the way on the
gates
are real arseholes and real hard work. And for some reason, just, I don't know, I can get Anthony Hopkins, I can get Kevin Smith, but I can't get those keys to the gates for Edgar Wright. And I just want to talk to him, but one day.
That's a shame. No, I don't think so. Not in terms of an actual interview. My desert island artist, the artist to whom I would listen to if I was told I could only ever listen to one artist ever again, would doubtless be Elvis Costello.
Yeah.
And actually, I appeared on an Elvis Costello appreciation podcast. It was the first podcast I did in support of my book. And I figured out then that I'm not sure that I do want to interview him, to be honest with you, because I think that doubtless I would try far too hard to impress upon him that I knew more perhaps than most other writers who interviewed him. Not because I'm better researched or anything like that, just because he's my favorite artist. And I'm not sure I could cope with it if it went badly, to be honest with you. I mean, perhaps I could. I've been doing this a long time. So in the format of an actual interview, Mark, I'm not sure I do want to speak to Elvis Costello. But if I were, for example, in some kind of fantasy parallel universe, if I was invited to have dinner with Elvis Costello, for example, in that kind of, where there was no, because there's a power imbalance in an interview, and I think that my technique as an interviewer, certainly in the break glass in case of emergency part of my mind, is that I just don't care about that power imbalance. I don't care. I'm not. They're not doing me a favor by speaking to me.
It's strange that you said Elvis Costello, right? Because I'm going to sound ignorant now, and I'm not trying to be, but there's so much music in the world, and everyone tells me certain artists you should also listen to. So everyone always says, listen to Rolling Stones, listen to Beatles, listen to Elvis Costello, all these people.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just don't get ever around to it. You just don't ever listen to these artists. But what I do, and I'll be asking you the question in a minute on the podcast, every guest that's ever been on for 5 years always chooses the last piece of music that's played at the very end of the podcast. And I did a Clerks free special this week, and I had Jeff, who plays Randall in the film, and he chose "Peace, Love, and Understanding" by Elvis Costello as his final piece of music, or "What's So Funny About," that.
Yeah.
Track. And that's the very first time in my life I've heard Elvis Costello, which sounds crazy because I'm 40 years old, but I fucking loved it, and I was like, "This is awesome." So I'm now starting to think, right, where do I start? Like, where do I dive in on someone who's had so much music out and such a legacy?
That's strange. Weirdly, that's not even Elvis Costello's song.
No, but I just love the sound and everything about it, and the vocals, and it was amazing.
Yeah. Where to start? I'll tell you privately. I mean, just dive in, basically.
Anything. Maybe just on a playlist of all hits, so I can just listen to everything.
Yeah, actually, you know what? Start with. I'm going to pick 3 albums from the earlier period. Do this year? No. Do Armed Force. Oh my God, this is impossible. Do Imperial Bedroom. do this year's model, and do Imperial Bedroom, do Armed Forces, and do Blood and Chocolate.
Okay.
And that's sort of the earlier period.
I'm literally going. I'm doing Imperial now, so I can then take it with me when I'm on my drive.
Okay, Imperial Bedrooms. It's a masterpiece. I don't like the second song. I don't like Tears Before Bedtime.
Right.
But that for me is the. Bear in mind, there's 15 songs on the album.
Yeah.
That's not a bad hit rate. I'm not wildly keen on Tears Before Bedtime.
But all the others are great.
Yeah, all the others are great. And if you listen to the drumming on the first track, Beyond Belief, Pete Thomas, who's one of the world's great drummers, he had been up all night carousing. It was recorded at Abbey Road here in London, and he'd been up all night carousing. He told me this personally, forgive the name drop. He'd been up all night carousing, as I've now said for 3 times. Elvis, not impressed with this behavior because they were recording at Abbey Road, it's not cheap, said, you need to record this, you need to do this, you need to get this right. It's such an impossibly difficult drum part, and he nailed it in a single take. So think of that. Think of that when you listen to Beyond Belief, the opening track. A drunk, sleep-deprived drummer nailed that drum take in a single take. Yeah.
And my final question then is, what would you love to be your song today? It can be any song by any band to basically outro this interview we've done.
I mean, for God's sake, Mark, you could have given me a heads up on
Nope,
it.
I put every person on the spot on the
Well,
night.
you've sort of spooked me now because someone had already chosen Elvis Costello.
And that was only 2 episodes ago, so
I can't, you know what I mean? I've got to. So, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? I don't know. Let me have a quick look at my phone here. Oh, I tell you what we'll do. We'll do the song that I would like to have played at my funeral, and then it's
nice.
on the record. And we're going to have a song by ZZ Top,
nice,
called "Que Lastimar," and I can't remember the album that it's from. Rhythmine. No, not Rhythmine. It's not from Rhythmine. Hang on a second. I'll look it up. Do you want me to look it up, or is that important?
No, go for it. I want you to. It's good.
Okay, all right. Give me a minute. I'm not very good at using phones or technology. Also, you asked me about my advice for people that if you're not very good at technology, writing is a good thing to do. I'm not sure I could do that. Yeah, it's Mescalero. It's from the Mescalero album, and it's called Que Lastimar. And as best I understand it, it's not even the lyrics aren't even English. As best I understand it is a famous Mexican kind of popular folk song. But the skill with which they play the song is something to behold.
Incredible. I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, and we finally just kind of scraped the surface today. But anyone that's listening right now, I want them to go out there and buy the book Bodies, Life and Death in Music, because genuinely, it's an amazing book. And like everything, now I want to go back and listen to your other stuff, especially the stuff on the punk stuff and the Offspring. Is it Smash something? Is that the
Smash? Yeah. Smash was my period. It's not Smash isn't as well written as Bodies. I don't mean to discourage people from buying my books, but I had a look at it recently, and it's like, oh man, some of this writing's not quite as good as I am these days. Which I suppose is a good thing. It'd be bad if you think, oh God, I can't write as well as that anymore.
But maybe I'll come down south and we'll have a pint and we'll sit and talk again.
That'd be lovely.
Yeah.
That'd be lovely, Mark.
I really appreciate your time coming on today. It's genuinely meant a lot, and I think there's a lost art of lost conversations, and too many people just want a 10-minute quick interview, and it doesn't even get warmed up by that point.
No, God, you know what I mean? I could like you, I've enjoyed this thoroughly.
So there it is. There's my interview with me and the amazing Ian Winwood. And as I said at the start of today's interview, he's someone that I really admire, I look up to. I've been very, very influenced by him, and it was an honour to have him on the podcast. It was so easy to talk to him, and I think we could talk for 10, maybe 20 hours, so I hope we can do another episode in the very near future. As I've also mentioned on today's episode quite a lot, you should go and check out his book. It's available now. You need to just basically go on Amazon and type in Ian Winwood, and his first book that will come up is called Bodies, Life and Death in Music. And just treat yourself. You will not regret it, and when you have, and you've bought it, and you've read it, and you fell in love, make sure you tweet me or Facebook me and let me know. Because this is why I do the podcast, to bring you new albums, new books, or new films, and hopefully, if you take something away and absolutely love it, then I've done my job well. If you've really enjoyed today's episode, all I ask is that you share it. It costs nothing to do, and on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, it's literally the click of a couple of buttons. A retweet, a share, or put it on your stories. It really goes a long way. And if you've really enjoyed today's episode, I do have a Patreon account. All the money that you guys put into that goes right back into the podcast. It allows me to go out there, record more interviews for you guys at home, allows me to travel, host the podcast on so many different directories, and it really goes a long way. And to say thank you, thanks to my good friends at Richer Sounds, I have some amazing prizes each and every month just to basically say thanks for the support. You'll also get a badge as soon as you sign up, stickers, and some exclusive episodes starting in November for Patreons only. It's going to be wild. I can't wait to share these episodes with you, and they'll be exclusive just for Patreons. All the links are on markandme.com that I've mentioned today, and I really do appreciate all the support. I'll be back in only a few days' time with a brand new episode, and I've said this to a lot of my close friends this week. I've recorded about 14 episodes in the last 10 days, and I truly believe it's my best work I've ever done. That's not me being arrogant, because I never like my own podcasts. I listen back and I cringe. But these interviews, there's something magical about them. I'm on such a good run, and I can't wait to share them. So until then, look after yourself, take care, buy yourself that book, and I'll speak to you all very soon.
Y nosotros los pobres borrachos, nadie nos quiere coger. Ni nuestro corazón no es tan malo, pero no tenemos mujer. Qué lástima, qué lástima. Qué lástima, qué lástima, qué lástima, qué lástima. Nosotros tenemos cervezas, también tenemos tiempo. Importante tener pocos pesos, pero mi suerte es mala siempre. Qué lástima, qué lástima, qué lástima, qué lástima, qué lástima, qué lástima. Qué lástima. Y nosotros los pobres borrachos, nadie nos quiere coger. Ni nuestro corazón no es tan malo, pero no tenemos mujer. Sí, señor.